So chat, just got done hooping. I feel like I'm starting to realize that it's probably not the best idea to go hoop after a back and by day. I brick too much on Tuesdays, or I genuinely just suck. But enough making excuses. Let's get back to it. Once again, we're started a new book called Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. We're still in the introduction, but let's finish it off today. In the 16th century, there were close to 70 wars involving the nations and states of Europe. The Danes fought the Swedes, and the Poles fought the Teutonic Knights. The Ottomans fought the Venetians. The Spanish fought the French, and on and on. If there was a pattern to end this conflict, it was that battles overwhelmingly involved neighbors. You fought the person directly across the border who had always been directly across your border, or you fought someone inside your own borders. The Ottoman War of 1509 was between two brothers. Throughout the majority of human history, encounters, hostile or otherwise, were rarely between strangers. The people you met and fought often believed in the same God as you, built their buildings and organized their cities in the same way you did, fought their wars with the same weapons according to the same rules. But the 16th century blood-less conflict fit none of those patterns. When the Spanish conquistador Herman Cortes met the Aztec ruler Montezuma II, nearly side knew anything about the other at all. Cortes landed in Mexico in February of 1519 and slowly made his way inland, advancing on the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. When Cortes and his army arrived, they were in awe. Tenochtitlan was an extraordinary sight, far larger and more impressive than any of the cities Cortes and his men would have known back in Spain. It was a city on an island linked to the mainland with bridges and crossed by canals. It had grand boulevards, elaborate aqueducts, thriving marketplaces, temples built in brilliant white stucco, public gardens, and even a zoo. It was spotless clean, which to someone raised in the filth of medieval European cities would have seemed almost miraculous. When we saw so many cities and villages built in the water and other great towns on dry land, we were amazed and said that it was like the enchantments. One of the Cortes' officers, Bernal Diaz del Castillo, recalled, and some of our soldiers even asked whether the things that we saw were not a dream. I do not know how to describe it, seeing things as we did that had never been heard of or seen before, not even dreamed about. The Spanish were greeted at the gates of Tenochtitlan by the assembly of Aztec chiefs, then taken to Montezuma. He was a figure of almost surreal grandeur, carried on a litter embroidered with gold and silver and festooned with flowers and precious stones. One of his courtiers advanced before the procession, sweeping the ground. Cortes dismounted from his horse. Montezuma was lowered from his litter. Cortes, like the Spaniard he was, moved to embrace the Aztec leader, only to be restrained by Montezuma's attendants. No one embraced Montezuma. Instead, the two men bowed to each other. Art thou Montezuma? Montezuma answered, "Yes, I am he." No European had ever set foot in Mexico. No Aztec had ever met a European. Cortes knew nothing about the Aztecs except to be in awe of their wealth and the extraordinary city they had built. Montezuma knew nothing of Cortes except that he had approached the Aztec kingdom with great audacity, armed with strange weapons and large mysterious animals, horses that the Aztec had never seen before. Is it any wonder why the meeting between Cordis and Montezuma was fascinated historians for so many centuries? That moment 500 years ago, when explorers began traveling across oceans and undertaking bold expeditions in previously unknown territory, an entirely new kind of encounter emerged. Cordis and Montezuma wanted to have a conversation even though they knew nothing about the other. When Cordis asked Montezuma, "Art they he?" He didn't say those words directly. Cordis spoke only Spanish. He had to bring two translators with him. One was an Indian woman named Malinche, who had been captured by the Spanish some months before. She knew the Aztec language, Nahuatl, and Mayan, the language of the Mexican territory where Cortes had begun his journey. Cordis also had with him a Spanish priest named Guillermino del Aguilar, who had been shipwrecked in the Yucatan and learned Mayan during his sojourn there. So Cordis spoke to Aguilar in Spanish. Aguilar translated into Mayan for Malichin, and Malichin translated the Mayan into Nahuatl for Montezuma. And when Montezuma replied, "Yes, I am," the long translation chain ran in reverse. The kind of easy face-to-face interaction that each had lived with his entire life had suddenly become hopelessly complicated. Cordis was taken to one of Montez's palaces, a place that Aguilar described later as having innumerable rooms inside, in chambers, splendid halls, mattresses of large cloaks, pillows of leather and tree fiber, good and eider downs, and admirable white fur robes. After dinner, Montezuma rejoined Cordis and his band and gave a speech. Immediately, the confusion began. The way the Spanish interrupted Montez's remarks, the Aztec king was making an astonishing concession. He believed Cordis to be a god, the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy that said an exiled deity would one day return from the east, and he was, as a result, surrendering to Cordis. You can imagine Cordis's reaction. His magnificent city was now effectively his. But is that really what Montezuma meant? Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, had a reverential mode. A royal figure such as Montezuma would speak in a kind of code, according to a cultural tradition in which the powerful projected their status through an elaborate false humility. The word in Nahu for a noble, the historian Matthew Restall points out, is all but identical to the word for child. When a ruler such as Montezuma spoke of himself as small and weak, in other words, he was actually subtle, drawing attention to the fact that he was esteemed and powerful. The impossibility of adequately translating such language is obvious. Restall writes, the speaker was often obligated to say the opposite of what was really meant. True meaning was embedded in the use of reverentile language, stripped of these nuances in translation and distorted through the use of multiple interpreters. Not only was it unlikely that a speech such as Montezuma's would be accurately understood, but it was probable that its meaning would be turned upside down. In that case, Montezuma's speech was not his surrender, it was acceptance of a Spanish surrender. You probably remember from high school history how the encounter between Cordis and Montezuma ended. Montezuma was taken hostage by Cordis, then murdered. The two sides went to war. As many as 20 million Aztecs perished, either directly at the hands of the Spanish or indirectly from the diseases they had brought with them. Tenochtitlan was destroyed. Cordis's foray into Mexico ushered in the area of catastrophic colonial expansion and is also introduced in a new and distinctly modern pattern of social pattern of social interaction. Today, we're now through into contact all the time with people whose assumptions, perceptions, and backgrounds are different from our own. The modern world is not two brothers feuding for control of the Ottoman Empire. It is Cortes and Montezuma struggling to understand each other through multiple layers and translators. Talking to strangers is about why we are so bad at the act of translation. Each of the chapters that follows is devoted to understanding a different aspect of the stranger problem. You will have heard of many of the examples. They are taken from the news. At Stanford University in Northern California, a first-year student named Brock Turner meets a woman at a party, and by the end of the evening, he is in police custody. A Pennsylvania State University, a former assistant coach of the school's football team, Jerry Sanducci, is found guilty of pedophilia, and the president of the school and two of his top aides are found to be complicit in his crimes. You will read about a spy who spent years undetected at the highest level of the Pentagon, about the man who brought down hedge fund manager Breen Madoff, about the false conviction of the American exchange student Amanda Knox, and about the suicide of the poet Sylvia Plath. In all of these cases, the parties involved relied on a set of strategies to translate one another's words and intentions, and in each case, something went very wrong. In talking to strangers, I went to understand those strategies, analyze them, critique them, figure out where they come from, find out how to fix them. At the end of the book, I will come back to Sandra Bland because there is something about the encounter by the side of the road that ought to haunt us. Think about how hard it was. Sandra Bland was not someone Brian Encinia knew from the neighborhood or down the street. That would have been easy. Sandy, how are you? Be a little more careful next time. Instead, you have Bland from Chicago and Encinia from Texas. One a man and the other a woman, one white and one black, one a police officer and one a civilian, one armed and the other unarmed. They were strangers to each other. If we were more thoughtful as a society, if we were willing to engage in some soul searching about how we approach and make sense of strangers, she would have not have ended dead in a Texas jail cell. But to start, I have two questions, two puzzles about strangers, beginning with a story told by a man named Florento Aspiliga years ago in a German debriefing room. And that is the introduction. This is why I love Malcolm Gladwell. He's a great storyteller, great researcher to even pull the amount of, history just in the first introduction, the first couple pages is very mind-boggling to me. But needless to say, I think that also sets a very good example of what miscommunication can look like between individuals. For some reason, one thought that came to mind is why we're so connected to some of the greatest people that we know. And what I mean by that is by friends. It's very easy to connect with someone that you know, that you have the same humor, you guys think on the same level. Having that mastermind group, relating back to what we said earlier in the previous book, Think and Grow Rich. But to stick to this, I think it's very easy to fall into that pattern that, oh, I'm speaking to you some way and you must understand me because everyone that I interact with understands me. But reality, that is not the reality. We all think differently, we all speak differently, we all have different interpretations for some things, whether that be for slang, whether that be in general communication. And not to mention, to end it off on this statement, this goes for personal and professional life. And I will argue that in professional life, it could even get more hairy. So yeah, that's it. We'll finish off. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace for part 1.